Having someone like Lori in my life was extraordinary. She didn't tell me what to feel. She didn't stand in judgment. Here was this woman who simply enjoyed taking care of my daughter, and she did it, as I said, without sadness and judgment, and there were others. And so these things helped us accommodate to Rachel, not quickly, and certainly not in those neat little stages everyone seems to love. It was nothing at all like that. There were no neat little stages. People love the notion that grieving is neat. So often I've read or heard people talk about grief over a less than perfect child being similar to the stages Elizabeth Kubler-Ross sets out in her classic book on death and dying, that parents, like people facing death, go through denial and isolation, anger, bargaining, depression, before acceptance. We didn't do it this way. I mean, we did all those things. But I personally was all over the place. I could do denial, isolation, anger, and bargaining in one afternoon. In one day, I could absolutely suddenly have a moment of refusing to believe the diagnosis. She wasn't blind. And then in the afternoon, become absolutely obsessed with it and be unable to think of anything else. I think it's also more accurate to say that in a family, often each family member grieves in a different way, and this includes siblings. And further, that each person, while grieving, often needs something specific, comfort or distraction, and that often the something is just what the other person is unable to give. For example, a baby is diagnosed with optic nerve hypoplasia. The wife needs to cry. The husband needs to get away from all thoughts of his baby's diagnosis. Or one partner wants to talk about what's happened, to talk, to analyze and research, and the other cannot bear to listen. Some people say it's because men and women are raised to behave in different ways, that it's okay for women to cry while men are trained to keep a stiff upper lip and be manly and protect the family. I think there are also lots of cultural differences. Different ethnic groups have different attitudes towards disability and different attitudes towards mourning. Take, for instance, in my family, the difference between an Irish wake and Jewish Shiva, and you have a sense of how different the response to mourning, and a lot of laughter, that's interesting. So there's a lot of, I think there's a tremendous amount of variation. I think in addition, in grieving, like in literature, there's a text and a subtext. There's how we overtly act. We cry when we hear bad news, and how we act despite ourselves. We have a fight with our spouse and we yell at our son about his homework, you know. In the Rachel book, I wrote, we learn to love by being loved, and later by falling in love. We learn to raise children and live with another person in much the same way. Nothing teaches us about grief until we grieve, and then it's too late. I believe our styles of mourning are as indelible as our fingerprints, and that we cannot change the way we grieve. I also believe that we have to go through with it. And distraught family members and well-meaning professionals should not try to jolly grieving parents out of any stage with the illogic of statements that begin, you know, think how blessed your lives are. You've all heard this, right? Things could be worse, take one day at a time. I particularly hated take one day at a time. It drove me crazy. I was not psychologically capable of taking one day at a time. It's just not the way my brain works. So I used to get crazy. And then there's this awful American obsession with closure, which I think is really brought on by like TV talk shows where you have this drama that's introduced and played out, and 20 minutes later it's resolved. It's closure, 20 minutes. And it's uncomfortable for people if you don't have closure. And so lots of people want to assume that you're going through neat, predictable stages that they understand, and then you have closure. It doesn't happen that way. I think, as somebody, the mother of a 25-year-old, in my experience, unique as each of yours is, but I would still say your grief is going to abate in time. Your life will settle down. You will accommodate. And after you do, whenever you do, you're going to find that you still love your child, and you're going to find that you still worry, but worrying comes with the territory of loving anybody. It's not just worrying about your kid with a disability. You worry about all your kids, you worry about your family members. Worry is there forever, and love is there forever. But at some point, you will accommodate. And for those of you I've talked to who are very early on, it will happen. It will happen.